Marco Polo, His Travels and Adventures, Chapter 5, Part 1. Marco Polo reaches Cathay. After passing across the Great Gobi Desert, where he endured many hardships and once came near being lost by being separated from his companions, Marco encountered a very different country and people from those he had before seen. Before he had met with Turkomans only, for the most part fierce, wandering tribes given to plundering and murder and going from place to place without any settled home. Now he found himself among a quiet, busy, and to a large degree civilized people, the greater portion of whom seemed to be farmers devoted to the tilling of the fruitful and abundantly yielding lands. Instead of the tall, large-featured, heavily bearded Turkomans, the people were short and squat, with squinted eyes, high cheekbones, hair braided in long queues behind, and a peculiar yellow complexion. They were indeed Chinese. Their loose costumes, their hats turned up at the brim, their small shoes turned up at the toes, their taste in dress, marked them as a quite distinct race from the inhabitants of the mountain regions Marco had not long before traversed. Instead of the plain mosques, too, with their glaring white exteriors, their bare interiors, and their big bulb-like domes, Marco now saw gorgeous temples, decked out both inside and out, with the greatest profusion of ornament, and containing huge idols that fairly glittered with gilding and gems. The towns, instead of consisting of low, plain buildings, were full of variety and adornment in their architecture, and displayed the high degree to which the arts had even then been carried by the Chinese. Everywhere the fields were aglow with rich and plentiful crops. Marco could not but perceive the air of home-like contentment that everywhere prevailed, in contrast with the restless and savage customs of the Turkomans, and as he passed through the Chinese villages towards evening, he was visibly reminded of home when he saw the Chinese families cozily seated in front of their doors, or in the little shaded balconies over them, enjoying, after the day's labor, the serenity and repose of the twilight hours, very much as the Venetians were wont to do. He was much struck by the great number of temples and of monasteries which he saw as the party penetrated the country. Instead of the worship of Mohammed the Prophet, the people were Buddhists, and paid their devotion to the countless idols everywhere set up. Marco soon learned a great deal about the manners and habits of this race, which greatly excited his curiosity. Every Chinese who had children was wont, at a certain festival, to take them, with a sheep, to one of the temples, where the sheep was cooked and offered as a sacrifice to the chief idol. After the meat had been left for some time at the feet of the idol, it was taken away, and the man invited his friends together to feast upon it. The bones were then collected and kept in the house with much reverence and care. When a man or woman died, the body was burned. It was first carried to a sort of pavilion erected for the purpose, and placed in it, and then the friends brought wine and food, and put it before the corpse. Arriving at the funeral pyre, the mourners cut out of paper a number of little figures representing men, horses, camels, and lions, which they threw upon the flames as they enveloped the dead person, believing that by doing so they ensured their relation the possession of the realities thus represented in the other world. One day the Venetians arrived at a city called Camel, which struck Marco as a very gay and lively place. The people here seemed to think of nothing but having a perpetual good time. Their main occupation was that of farming, but they seemed to work very little, while their storehouses were full to overflowing, and they evidently had an abundance of good things. From morning till night, while Marco stayed at Camel, he heard nothing but sounds of music, singing, and dancing. He was awakened by the playing of strange, loud musical instruments and went to sleep with their sounds still ringing in his ears. The people were exceedingly hospitable and vied with each other to receive the strangers as their guests. The master of the house where Marco lodged, having seen to it that he was comfortably ensconced, went off to another house, leaving Marco to do as he pleased, and for the time master. Marco could not fail to observe that the women of Camul were not only full of gaiety and fond of amusement, but were singularly handsome. Every evening they were dancing and singing in the open spaces in front of the houses, in which all seemed to join with the heartiest gusto. Marco found that the sorcerers and magicians were held in awe and high respect here, as in other countries through which he had passed. The Chinese sorcerers were very different looking personages, however, from those he had so often seen in Turkestan. They wore long mustaches that flowed down on their breasts, but no beards on their chins. Instead of long black gowns, they appeared in tunics, blazoned all over with the figures of dragons, dolphins, and other fabulous animals. They carried long wands, often of silver or gold, and on their heads they wore high caps, richly fringed. Whenever a sorcerer passed along the street, the people uncovered until he had gone by. These mysterious men lived apart from the rest of the world, often in monasteries that stood on hills on the outskirts of the town, and it was the custom of the people, whenever any special event occurred in their towns, such as a birth, a death, a journey, or a fire, to seek in all haste their magicians to learn its significance and bearing upon their lives. The sorcerers, of course, charged a large round sum for their prophecies, and so were all rich and lived in much grandeur and luxury. As soon as any one died, the sorcerer was applied to and informed of the exact date of the dead person's death. He then went into his room and performed a number of strange incantations, after which he was able to tell the relatives what day and hour it would be lucky to bury the dead. He would also inform them by what door the corpse should be carried out of the house, and sometimes told them that it must be brought into the street through a hole made in the wall, so as to give good fortune to the living relatives. Not far from Camul, Marco and his party came to a large mining district, where he had an opportunity to witness another instance of the skill and intelligence of the Chinese. There were mines of copper and antimony, and also mines from which a very peculiar mineral, called asbestos, was taken. The ore of this asbestos, it seems, was taken from the mountains and broken up, and then became a sort of stringy mass. It was dried and crushed in a mortar, and then formed a rough, strong thread. This thread was woven into cloth, and being bleached by fire, became as white as snow and very strong. The idea of making a cloth out of a mineral dug from mountain gorges was a new and surprising one to our young traveler. As Marco advanced through the country, which was that of Tangat, he observed that the temples became larger and more magnificent, and that the idols in them also increased in size and splendor of decoration. He saw at one of the more populous cities idols 10 or 12 feet high, of wood, stone, and clay, and completely covered with thick plates of gold and ivory. In some of these temples, the priests, unlike those of other parts in China, lived with great sobriety and even self-denial. During 1 month in the year, these priests would not kill any animal or even insect, however small, and in this month they only partook of flesh, and that of the plainest kind, once in 5 days. The people of this region, on the other hand, lived in a very gross and beastly way, giving themselves up to self-indulgence and indolence. The richer men had many wives, whom they divorced as soon as they got sick of them, and often married their cousins and other near relatives. They devoted a great deal of time to eating, drinking, and sleeping, and impressed Marco as a much lower order of beings than the other Chinese he had seen. The travelers were about to resume their journey westward when they heard news that greatly disappointed them and caused them to delay their departure from Campisian, the chief town of Tangat. This news was that a great war had broken out between two nations whose territories were directly in their path to Cathay. Their way, indeed, lay through the very region where the war had already begun to rage. To attempt to reach Cathay by any other road was impossible, for the countries north and south were unknown to their guides, and they would probably get lost or fall into the hands of hostile races if they tried an unknown roundabout road. They were therefore forced to content themselves with awaiting the return of peace at Campisian, an idea which was far from pleasant to Marco, who did not think it an attractive place, and was, moreover, very impatient to reach his journey's end. He made the best of circumstances, however, and finding that the war was likely to last some time, resolved to spend the time of waiting in making explorations in the neighboring regions. He accordingly set out with a small company and made his way from place to place as best he could, narrowly observing all the curious peoples and customs that he encountered.